Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. Big slate today. Every team is playing, but we only have 13 games on the main slate because there are a couple games that start at the 6:40 Eastern time slot today, and those ones luckily not included on the main slate, so it does shave the slate down at least a couple of games. Also positive, no weather concerns, no games that look like they're at risk of being canceled. We are sponsored by Prize Picks today, and I'm joined by Adam to break down all the games. Adam, how you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Decent DFS night last night. Played cash for the first time this season. Came out ahead there, so that was nice. So yeah, feeling pretty good today.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was just after seeing the Angels ownership, I was like, just don't be the Angels as the highest scoring team, and they sucked. So I did well. That was kind of all that I really needed to. Well, also the Blue Jays doing well was nice for me, especially some of the home runs from guys like Biggio and Tapia, and the Biggio homer later in the game. But really, the big thing for me was just the Angels not doing well because they had absurd ownership. Where some contests of Mike Trout like 50% owned, Ohtani and Ward were super popular. So I was just kind of fading them and hoping other teams would go off, which ultimately ended up being the case. For today's slate, like I said, 13 games, a lot to talk about, so I want to get right into it. Also, we don't have all the pitchers as of now. We are also missing some of the betting lines, so that's information that will come out a little bit later in the day. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live Before Lock later in the day. We've got all of the information totally updated at that point. But for now, starting with one of those games where we don't have all the pitchers, don't have a betting line yet, we have the Washington Nationals against the Baltimore Orioles. No confirmed starting pitcher for Baltimore. We know it's not going to be anybody good. That's for sure. On the Washington side of the game, Eric Fedde is pitching. So I don't think there's too much we could talk about when it comes to Baltimore pitching or the Washington Nationals offense because we don't know who's going to be on the mound. What do you make of the matchup that the Orioles have against Eric Fedde?
Decent matchup. I mean, Fetty's not particularly good. He's not particularly bad for the season. A 4.5 xFIP, 1 home run allowed per 9 innings. Baltimore's an offense that, I say it a lot, like overall they're league average, but the top of their order does give you some solid upside. Like their active roster has a 100 WRC plus, 153 ISO. But when you look at the top of the order, really 1 through 6, when you're talking about, Mullins, Mancini, Santander, Hayes, Mountcastle, Rutschman, those guys are all solid major league hitters. Rougned Odor has some power. Tyler Nevin has some power. Jorge Mateo has some speed. So they are a team that I really don't mind stacking in spots like this. Right now, we have them looking at the top stacks tool as the second lowest top stack percentage. That seems very low to me. Seems like it should probably be higher to my to my intuition, which again doesn't really matter all that much. But surprised to see them that low in this spot. I think I liked them a little bit more than that.
Yeah, and we did get a comment in the chat from Tony A saying he sees Lyles as the starting pitcher for the Orioles. So here's the situation with Jordan Lyles. He was scheduled to start on Sunday. He got scratched because of an injury. They had an off day yesterday.
It wasn't an injury.
It was. I thought it was an injury.
Stomach virus.
So stomach. Yeah. Okay. There it is. Yeah. So from Nathan Rees of the Baltimore Sun, Jordan Lyles was scratched with a stomach virus. So for now, people are just assuming he's going to pitch today, but it's not totally confirmed because number one, he might still not be healthy. But then point two, Jordan Lyles kind of sucks. So if they could skip him in the rotation, just go with somebody else. That's also
there's no chance they skip him.
You don't think so?
No, he's one of their only starters that actually gives them innings. They just had a bullpen game on Sunday. If he's healthy, he's pitching.
Yeah. So what we have at least is the most recent report is that the veteran right-hander remains in the mix to start Tuesday against the Nationals coming off Monday's off day, but it remains to be seen if he's feeling well enough to pitch. So if he's out there, and like I said, it doesn't matter who pitches for the Orioles, it's going to overall be a good spot for the Washington Nationals, but it would matter if it's a left-handed starter or a right-handed starter, and it isn't 100% confirmed that it's going to be Lyles. But I mean,
realistically, it's better for the Nats if the Orioles, it doesn't really matter which starter it is. If the Orioles have an actual starter, it's better for the Nats than if the Orioles have another bullpen game because their bullpen's actually solid. Granted, they did have to use them, for all 9 innings on Sunday. You got like 2 1/3 from Austin Voth and then just the bullpen from there. But that is something to keep in mind. Like whoever it is starting, whether it's Lyles or another actual starter, that's going to be better than if you get another Orioles bullpen game.
Which is going to be the case for most spots because in general, pitchers are just going to be more effective in 1 or 2 innings than they are over the course of an entire game. And to your point before, bringing up the bullpen stats for the Baltimore Orioles this year, Their bullpen is a 3.19 ERA, 3.65 FIP. That's certainly way better than any other starter they throw out there. And, even the worst bullpens in baseball are generally better than even mediocre starting pitchers. There are some exceptions, like Cincinnati Reds bullpen has a 5.06 ERA, a 4.67 FIP. But almost every single team in the MLB has a bullpen ERA at least in the low fours, if not better. And that's just better than the majority of starting pitchers. So most of the times we see a bullpen game, to your point before, it's probably going to be more difficult for starters compared to starters. But once again, we don't know exactly what Baltimore is going to do today. And we just need an update on the health of Jordan Lyles and how he's feeling. But any other takes for you on the Nationals offense in this spot?
If we assume that it is Lyles, it's certainly a decent spot for the Nats. Looks like right now in the tools on the site, we have Lyles in, and we have Washington coming in with about a 5% chance of being the top stack, 8% aggregate ownership. Certainly a very, very good spot for Juan Soto. Josh Bell at 3,500 looks fantastic. Nelson Cruz, Keibert Ruiz, these guys are fine as well. So the Nats, assuming for now that it is Lyles, the Nats look pretty solid. Individually, Soto and Bell really stand out.
All right, so let's move on to the next game. And I'll try to get us through these games with some pace, particularly spots that we don't have much interest in. So we're not really spending too much time on spots that neither you nor I are planning on getting exposure to. But the next one I do think is kind of interesting because it is the Pirates at home against the Cubs. Couple things of interest here. Couple prospects. First, Roundsy Contreras on the mound for Pittsburgh, 25.2% K rate. He's a young pitcher. He's really good stuff. He's going to be inconsistent. We've seen some blow up starts from him. We've also seen some really good outings from him. Also, yesterday we saw the Pirates top prospect. Actually, what is the price today? I should have looked at this beforehand. What is the price?
Still 2K flat on O'Neill Cruz, if that's what you're looking for.
All right. So we are getting a 2. And does he still have
outfield shortstop? Yes.
All right. So O'Neill Cruz, who looked pretty good in his start yesterday, he had a couple of hits. Oh, the throw it was the hardest throw of the entire season. So if you guys didn't look up the throw that O'Neill Cruz had yesterday, there's a kind of routine play to shortstop, but it was also a difficult play. He had to range a little bit to his left. And I can't remember who was running, but it was a pretty fast runner. Basically moving to. Well, was it? Well, either way, he was making pretty good speed down the base path, and O'Neill Cruz really had to unload the ball to get it to first base. Flat-footed, he threw the ball at 95.7 miles per hour. I think was the throw over to first base. Just an absolute laser beam. He is the size of Aaron Judge, but plays shortstop. Yeah. The only thing that was a little bit of a concern for me with O'Neill Cruz yesterday was that he hasn't hit the ball that well in AAA this year, 105 WRC+. I've actually chalked that up to him just being bored and disinterested at being in the minor leagues at this point in his career. We've seen this with other top prospects at other point in time. They know they're inevitably going to be called up to the major leagues. They had a long track record of success in the minor leagues. And I just am not all that concerned with what we've seen from Cruz at AAA this year. He's clearly super talented, hit the ball pretty well at his brief stint at the major league level last year. And now he's gotten off to a good start this year. As long as he remains this cheap on DraftKings and FanDuel, I have to feel like I'm going to load up on him.
Yeah, he right after the 96-mile-an-hour throw across the infield, he had a ball 112 miles an hour as well. Just absolutely ridiculous skill set. Looking at like his FanGraphs grades, 80-80 raw power, 40-70 game power, 60 current speed. Yeah, I mean, just ridiculously talented guy that should certainly not be $2,000. And the Pirates as a whole are really cheap here. I mean, not only do you have Cruz at 2K, you have Jack Sawinski at 2,100. You have Bly Madriz, who I think is another prospect that they just called up. Pulling it up now just to double check, but so he's 26. But he's also only 2K. So in general, just a really cheap offense for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and also the spot for them against Matt Schwarmer. It's not like Schwarmer is some pitcher that's all that well regarded or somebody to be feared at all. So Schwarmer's numbers this year, he is at why did all of my sheets just get fucked up here? Well, anyway, Schwarmer this year, he has a 21.6% carry, 1.26 whip. And the other thing too, the Pirates have an implied team total of 5.1. So they're really cheap. And I think this is a really good value spot to get to. Lets us pay up for offenses. They're going to be a little bit popular, but I think a lot of that ownership is ultimately going to be because of O'Neill Cruz. If you're making a 5-man stack of the Pirates, I don't think it's going to be that crazy popular. Just the one guy, O'Neill Cruz, is going to carry the bulk of the ownership. So 5-man stacks, do you see an issue getting to them because of the ownership? We do have them with a 22% chance being the top value stack, which is crazy on a 13-game slate.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I never want to roster a team as bad as Pittsburgh when they're popular, but they're so cheap too that you're just gonna be able to build good lineups around them. I will say right now we have O'Neal Cruz projected for 10% ownership. We have him projected to be the 5th highest owned bat on the Pirates. That is not going to happen. He's going to be the most popular guy there, basically without question. But even if we assume that he ends up being around 20%, it does pull up that Pirates ownership. So it's a spot where I still probably end up not stacking them as much as the field, but individually, using guys like O'Neal Cruz's value, Jack Sawinski's value, Brian Reynolds at 3,800 is a good value, to, kind of just mix into other lower owned stacks, I think is probably the approach that I'll take. And Josh and I said it on the strategy show yesterday, and I think it's the same case today. If you're playing cash games on DraftKings and you don't have O'Neal Cruz either at shortstop or in the outfield, maybe reconsider playing cash games.
Or just send them to Adam, who's back in the MLB. By the way, what percentage of your desire to play cash games is because of O'Neal Cruz being min price yesterday?
None. I just kind of got bored and wanted to play. Actually, what drove it was, Justin Freeman posted something the other day. I think you saw it about like how many DFS players are playing more than $10 million a year in volume. And just from being in that thread and having that conversation, it just made me feel really lazy about like the fact that I don't play more volume than I do. So I started firing cash games.
That's all it takes. One tweet about Adam that people are playing DFS for more money than him. He's like, I need to get more action. I need to get more money involved. That was all it take. One tweet, which was not directed to you in any way, but either way, motivated you, get some money down.
No, it's like, because then you think about it, because it's like, well, I'm not going to play cash games because there's not really an edge. But then if I can make like 2% at cash games, playing, like for example, yesterday, I think I played like $4,500. If I can make 2%, then over the course of a baseball season, I'm adding like 20K to my bottom line.
Yeah.
So kind of seems stupid and lazy not to.
No, I agree with that. Actually, I had that thought for a point in time because I don't love single game contests for NBA, but I do often find that for the playoff scenario, for the playoff games, that there are pretty optimal builds that I don't want to play in tournaments because, like, all right, everybody's going to have this lineup. And I realized on a couple of slates, like, well, I should be playing this in cash games. And I actually did really well on those single game slates for cash game purposes. But just in my head, I kind of always have like, I don't want to play cash games or super heavy volume for 1-game NBA slates. But I think what you say totally makes sense. And even if the edge isn't massive, if there's any edge at all, it's not like it's that much effort to build one lineup that's optimal for cash games and then just send out a bunch of head-to-heads, enter the large field 50-50. So
right.
Yeah.
Like the only real issue is like you end up doubling or tripling your like daily volume, which can certainly lead to some nasty downswings if like you just happen to run bad across cash and GPPs for a while. But yeah, I mean, other than that, yeah, it's really just, it doesn't take that long to build it. And if you can just make like 2% or whatever over the course of a season, that's going to be a pretty solid result.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And to wrap up this game, Roundsy Contreras on the mound for Pittsburgh. And like I was saying before, young pitcher, really good stuff. There's going to be certainly some starts where it's like, how the hell did he pitch this poorly against this team? But still, you look at the numbers for Contreras this year, overall, the stuff, the strikeout upside. I think that he is somebody who's worth getting to in a matchup against the Cubs, particularly when he's $7,400 over on DK. On FanDuel, he's $7,700, only projected for 6% ownership. Do you see Contreras as a good salary saving option today?
Yeah, I do. He's getting ownership, but I think deservedly so. Like when I woke up this morning, I kind of just, the first thing I did was, start, actually when I was posting my cash head-to-heads, just kind of scroll through the pitching, and like Contreras just sort of stands out like a sore thumb amongst these mid-range pitchers in terms of salary. It's not a bad matchup against the Cubs either. We know he's got really good stuff. He's pulling 21% ownership on DraftKings. He's really the only guy in the mid-range that's getting ownership. So from a tournament standpoint, if you want to say, Contreras is over-owned relative to any number of these other mid-range guys, and in an individual lineup go to one of them instead of Contreras, I think that's fine. But from a projection standpoint, if you're talking about a lineup where you're already contrarian and you don't care so much about ownership or whatever, I think Contreras clearly stands out as the top option amongst the sub 8K pitchers on DraftKings.
All right, let's move on to the next game now. Boston Red Sox at home against the Detroit Tigers. The Red Sox, 5.7 implied run total. Also, the team that we have projected with the top stack odds overall in our top stacks tool. If you guys want to check it out, free to use today. So if you go over to stokastic.com, check out our MLB tools, top stacks tool, free to use for DraftKings and FanDuel purposes. But because of the size of the slate, there's no one team that's picking up crazy high top stack odds. So we have Boston right around 7%, still makes them the team most likely to be the highest scoring, but that is offset by 11% projected ownership. So clearly implied run total super high in this spot for Boston, Adam. But how do you balance that with the size of the slate and the ownership going to them?
I still think they look pretty good here because looking individually at the hitters, Rafael Devers is projected to pull a ton of ownership here at 22.5%. And, deservedly so. He's clearly one of the best, if not the best, top third base options. But after that, the next highest owned hitter is Xander Bogaerts at 15%, Story and Duran at 14 and 12, respectively. And then everybody else is sub 10%. So you can make some relatively low owned stacks. You can certainly, they're low enough owned for the most part where you can certainly balance it out by going to some low owned pitching or a low owned secondary stack or something like that. It's a good matchup against Brieske. He's certainly not been good so far this year. 15.2% strikeout percentage against righties, 18.1% against lefties, 341 expected ISO to righties, 156 to lefties. Does seem to have a pretty good changeup, which is why you see, or probably why you see a little bit better numbers against lefties. But with this Boston lineup, you're still dealing with a lot of right-handed power here, and then at least one very good lefty in Devers, a very cheap lefty with speed in Jarren Duran. It looks like a very appealing spot to get to.
Yeah, there was that weird stretch where Duran went from the leadoff hitter to back to the minor leagues, and then Boston was batting like Rob Refschneider lead off. They're getting Christian Arroyo in the lineup at times, and they just brought Duran. He was gone for like a week, and he came back, immediately goes back to the leadoff spot in the lineup, and he's hit fairly well. So, overall in this slate, there isn't that much ownership to be all that concerned with. We've got for pitching options today over on DK, we've got 32% ownership going to Cortez, 44% to Minaya, which, fairly high, but nothing crazy. And then as far as stacks go, there's only two teams on the entire slate that are projected for double-digit ownership, the Angels and the Red Sox. I think just because it's a 13-game slate, would you agree that ownership is less of a talking point for this particular slate than it is on the majority of them?
Yeah, in general, like it still matters, everything's relative, but the larger the slates get, the less you're going to be put into situations where it's just like, well, if I roster this guy at this ownership, I really don't know how I'm getting contrarian. Like for example, yesterday, if you were going, even though yesterday was an 8-gamer, so you still don't run into that issue quite as much. But like if you were going Cole plus Burns plus Angels or something, congratulations. If that team happens to do well, you're still competing with like 15% of the field or something that did the same thing. So you just don't run into those types of concerns as much. It's much easier to find a low owned 3-man stack or pitcher or whatever you may need in your lineup.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the other side of the game, Rich Hill against the Tigers. I don't have interest in either of this. I don't really want to play Rich Hill on a slate of this size. He's not particularly good and limited strikeout upside at this point in his career at 19.2%. And then the Tigers, it only takes a very, very strong matchup or crazy amount of leverage or value to stack up the Tigers. I don't see a need to go to Detroit or Boston in this game. Are you on the same page as that? I mean, Rich Hill, not Boston overall.
Yeah, I mean, at 7,200 against the Tigers, I think he's one of the mid-range pitchers that if you need to save some ownership, you can certainly use him. He's projected for 5% ownership compared to Contreras' 21%. Contreras is clearly the preferred option. He has better strikeout stuff. But, if you were to give me 4-1 odds on Rich Hill versus Roansy Contreras, I'm taking Rich Hill. So in any given lineup, if you need to save some ownership, I think Hill is one of the guys that you can look to. 82 pitches last time out, 89, 78, 92. So he is relatively stretched out. It is a very, very good matchup against the Tigers. So here and there in tournament lineups, I think he makes sense, but it's not somebody that I expect to be prioritizing.
3 games down, 10 to go. Next one, Yankees at the Rays. This is another one we don't have right now a spread or a money line or anything like that for this game because the Rays have not officially named their starter. It does look like this is going to be a bullpen game for the Rays. But on the mound for the Yankees, Nestor Cortez, 27.8% K rate, sub 1 whip. He's been one of the top pitchers in all of baseball this year, 2.34 expected ERA. So I don't have any interest in stacking the Tampa Bay Rays against him. But Cortez, one of the only pitchers on today's slate, like I mentioned before, that is going to be popular. 32% projected ownership on DraftKings, 17 on FanDuel, second most popular pitcher on both slates behind Sean Manaea. But how important is he for you tonight?
I think Cortez looks great. For one, he has the third highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 27.8%. He's pitching in Tropicana Field, which is nice. And Tampa Bay lost two guys to the injured list after yesterday's game. One is Kevin Kiermaier, who, from an offensive standpoint, isn't a huge, like him not being in the lineup doesn't really matter for Cortez. You're just taking away some left-handed strikeouts. But Manny Margot also on the injured list. So we had seen a pretty watered down Tampa Bay lineup yesterday. You're going to get another one today. I mean, you still don't have Wander Franco. Now you don't have Kiermaier. Now you don't have Margot. This is not a particularly good offense right now. It's a good pitcher's park. It's the pitcher with the third best strikeout percentage on the slate. And then also when you look at the two pitchers that have higher strikeout percentages, Spencer Strider and Dylan Cease. Cease is facing Toronto, certainly not the most appealing matchup there. Strider's facing the Giants, difficult matchup as well. So out of those three, I think that you certainly feel the best about the Tampa Bay matchup in Tampa Bay. So 32% ownership, certainly a lot, but I don't have any issues getting Nestor Cortez here.
And then assuming this is going to be a bullpen game for Tampa Bay, you and I just talked about how in general, bullpen games are more difficult for the opposing offenses, but the New York Yankees absolutely never seem to lose games, and they score big amounts of runs fairly frequently, although yesterday were stifled by Shane McClanahan, which happens to the majority of teams going up against him. But how would you view the New York Yankees today projected for less than 1% ownership under the assumption that this is going to be a bullpen game for Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I mean, so right now it's looking like Josh Fleming, which is, you're probably looking at like 40 to 50 pitches, I would think. He's not bad, but he's still allowed a 198 expected ISO to righties in his limited time this year. Going back to last season, 166 expected ISO to righties. But to your point, it kind of just doesn't matter who the Yankees are facing. You can play whenever they're low owned, they're going to be an appealing tournament play. Whether or not like you end up prioritizing them is a different thing, but they're never a bad play. You can always get there just because of how much power they have and how good it is when they do well. One thing to clarify, I don't think this is actually an issue, but someone like tagged me in a screenshot of their lineup yesterday. And we had talked yesterday about liking the Yankees in tournaments and liking McClanahan. Anytime we're talking about that, we certainly do not mean in the same lineup. Someone like tagged me in their screenshot of their 5-man Yankee stack and McClanahan lineup. So just to clarify, anytime that we do that, we're not talking the same lineup, but at low ownership, the Yankees certainly look good.
Yeah, and there is obviously a breaking point when it comes to that. I mean, we're getting the Yankees at, about 0.5% ownership as a stack on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Whenever there's a time that the Yankees, pretty much in any matchup, are projected for less than 1% ownership, they're probably going to be positively leveraged. Like, I don't know that there's a single pitcher that the Yankees could go up against where they're this low owned that I wouldn't think that they warrant more ownership than that. So if you're playing single entry, it's not going to be my preferred stack. Even if you're playing 3, 5, 10 lineups, I probably wouldn't get the Yankees in any of those. But if you're somebody who plays a whole bunch of lineups, it's worth getting some exposure to the Yankees. And realistically, if you play one Yankee stack, you're probably overweight to them today. So from that standpoint, I could see reason to get to them. The next game to talk about on this slate, it is the Giants against the Braves. We get to talk about Spencer Strider a little bit here, which I'm excited about. But first, Anthony DeSclafani is going to be pitching for San Francisco against Atlanta. DeSclafani has spent time on the injured list, hasn't pitched for a little while. We saw something kind of similar with Alex Cobb coming off the injured list a few days ago, and he saw very limited pitches for San Francisco. So I don't expect DeSclafani to work very deep into this game. So there's no reason to consider him. But how do you look at the Braves offense going up against DeSclafani, who's been on the injured list for a while?
Yeah, spots like this are always interesting to me because even though DeSclafani is a solid pitcher when he's healthy, we have no idea what to expect from him here. And then Atlanta is similar to the Yankees in that they're always going to be a good tournament stack at relatively low ownership because they do have the highest ISO in baseball. They're such a good offense. Right now, they're projected for only 4% aggregate ownership, 6% chance of being the top stack is 5th highest on the slate. So even though I do respect DeSclafani as a pitcher, even if he were 100% and you had a better idea of what you're getting from him, I would still be interested in the Braves at this ownership. And then you add in the volatility of a pitcher making his first start back, and it makes them look even better.
Yeah, and then also with the Braves, it's hard to look at all of their numbers for the year and say like, oh, the Braves have just been an average offense against right-handed pitching, because we have to keep in mind that Ronald Acuna missed the start of the year. And then also when he came back, he's coming off such a significant ACL injury that he wasn't really himself to start the year. I think what we've gotten from the Braves over the last month or so is much more indicative of what this team is as an offense compared to the first month of the season. So I still think this is a good Braves offense. This is a decent spot to consider them. And then it's a good spot to consider their starting pitcher as well. Spencer Strider, who throws really just the fastball, but has such a good fastball that it doesn't matter. Hitters know it's coming, but he's throwing the ball as hard as 102 miles per hour sometimes. They call him Quadzilla. He's got big legs. He throws the ball hard. 38.6% K rate. Once again, primarily just throwing a fastball. How do you like him in what is a fairly tough matchup against the Giants?
I still like him here because of the price tag. This is an example of like DraftKings finally bumped up the price, but the baseline on him had been so low that giving him a substantial increase still doesn't make him overpriced. It just makes him like closer to correct. When you're taking him from 7,200, 6,900, 7,100, 7K, 7,700, there's a little bit of sticker shock where like my first thought was like, oh, if they finally increased the price on Strider, but you're talking about the guy with the highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 38.6%. Yes, he walks too many guys. He has a 12% walk percentage, but the strikeout stuff's just so good that 8,600, you still have a relatively high floor. Like floor is always difficult to talk about in baseball because there's so much volatility, and the floor for anybody is, well, for a pitcher is negative, and for a hitter it's always zero. But realistically, like whenever you have, when I do think about floor for pitching, strikeouts matter to me more than the matchup, because yeah, it's a tough matchup against the Giants, but if you're going to strike out more, around a third of the hitters that you face, that's racking up points that, every strikeout's an earned run. So if you can strike out 5 guys and you give up 5 earned runs, you're still going to end up getting like positive points overall. So targeting strikeout guys is, that's one reason it's so valuable. But when you take somebody like Strider and you make him 8,600, sure, he can still have a bad game, but the margin for error is still pretty high given how good he is at getting strikeouts.
Yeah, I love Spencer Strider. I bet him to win the NL Rookie of the Year just a few days ago. I haven't looked at what the updated odds are. I know that FanDuel had made him the betting favorite shortly after I had bet him. DraftKings hadn't updated the odds. I don't know if that's changed or not yet, but Spencer Strider, I think, has been really good this year and is somebody who, as long as he remains reasonably priced, I'm going to be playing a lot of him in DFS. I love the strikeout upside. Once again, 38.6% K rate. That is absurd for somebody who has the kind of salary that he has today. Just to reiterate, it is an $8,600 price tag over on DK. We have him with the 4th highest odds of being a top 2 scoring pitcher. And then over on FanDuel, $8,700. Neither of those I find to be fair. He should be more expensive than that, considering the kind of strikeout upside he has. So Spencer Strider is going to be a high priority pitcher for me to get to today. Next game on the slate, we have the Minnesota Twins at home against the Cleveland Guardians. At one point, Joe Ryan looked like one of the best young starting pitchers in baseball. And while he has had a solid start to the year, it's not quite as good as it was earlier in the year. We're still looking at good overall numbers for Joe Ryan, but it's not quite the guy who had like a sub-2 expected ERA through the first month of the season, but still 3.42 expected ERA, 23.3% strikeout rate. Is he somebody that you see yourself getting to up against the Guardians?
He's kind of like the $8,800 version of Rich Hill to me. If you give me 10-1 odds on Joe Ryan versus Spencer Strider today, I'm certainly taking Joe Ryan. But in most lineups, I'm going to want Spencer Strider. Normally I'm going to have a low enough owned stack or low enough owned SP2 or whatever it may be that I'm going to prefer getting to the projection of Strider. But in an individual lineup where you need to save ownership at pitcher, you are getting a 2% owned Joe Ryan, who does have about a 23.5% strikeout percentage. But outside of individual lineups where I need to save ownership, it's going to be pretty difficult to build around Joe Ryan here, I think.
Yeah, it's probably a little more than I want to pay for him when you consider he's a 23.3% strikeout rate. There was times early in the year where Joe Ryan was considerably cheaper, or he was on smaller slates where it made sense. It's going to be hard for me to prioritize him today, but I don't want to stack against him at all with Cleveland. Are you on the same page with that?
Pretty much, yeah. Also a very difficult strikeout matchup when you're going up against Jose Ramirez and Steven Kwan in particular, but also just a lineup that doesn't strike out a ton. As far as what he's given up this year, 260 expected ISO to left-handed hitters is pretty interesting to target. Not surprisingly, he's been much, much better against righties. 145 expected ISO, 28.5% strikeout percentage to righties, only a 17% strikeout percentage with that 260 expected ISO to lefties. So Jose Ramirez, I think, does look interesting. He's certainly someone, we mentioned Rafael Devers getting 22.5% ownership. Jose Ramirez at 14.5%. That's a spot where, getting a little bit of an ownership discount if you're paying up at third base, and going to Ramirez makes some sense. Josh Naylor at 4,200 seems solid, but I think it's probably more likely that I just get some individual one-offs to guys like Ramirez and Naylor than that I really build around Cleveland stacks.
And then the starting pitcher for Cleveland is going to be Aaron Savali, who's never really been all that appealing as a fantasy option, although at least in the past, He was a low strikeout guy that also didn't give up that many runs. This year, he's a 5.06 expected ERA, a 20.8% strikeout rate, 1.52 whip. So not really great numbers there when you're looking at Savali. He's going up against a fairly potent Minnesota Twins offense. So considering the struggles of Savali this year, the Twins look like a team to get to. Ownership looks like about appropriate, 7.5% ownership, 6.5 top stack odds. But still, the Minnesota Twins, that is the third highest top stack odds of anybody on the slate, considering the size of it. So Minnesota Twins, this is a team I like getting to against Savali. Is that a team that you're looking to get to as well?
Yeah, for sure. And one interesting thing with Savali too is that going back to last year, much better strikeout numbers against lefties. Gives up power to both sides of the plate. 186 expected ISO to lefties, 228 to righties, but a little bit more to righties. Has a curveball that he throws a lot to lefties. That's typically a pitch that if you have a good one, you can use to get opposite-handed hitters out. So that could be an explanation for why you see those numbers. But when you bring that back to Minnesota, Byron Buxton, Carlos Correa, not saying you necessarily prefer them because they're right-handed, because typically reverse splits do even out, but you certainly shouldn't be shying away from them. Like it sets up as, a good spot for two very good hitters, Buxton in particular. Arias pretty much always puts the ball in play. He's leading off. He's certainly reasonable. Looks like Alex Kirilloff is expected to be in the lineup at 2,200. That's a decent power back, hitting a good hitting prospect at close to minimum salary. So a way to save some money in this lineup as well.
If you guys want access to all of the great tools we have over at stokastic.com, you can sign up right now for a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership. And if you're signing up for the first time, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That is all one word, all capital letters. And that'll get you 50% off your first month of a Stokastic Plus membership. Get access to all the tools we have for basically every single DFS sport out there. And of course, for baseball, top pitchers tool, top stacks tool, ownership, all stuff that's really important to me when I'm building my lineup. So stop guessing, start winning, join Stokastic Plus today. Made it through
just to follow up, Kirilloff has been back this will be his fourth game back. He played the Arizona series, but Fangraphs has him as Minnesota's number one prospect, 16th overall, 35 games at AAA this year, 282 ISO. Steamer projects him for a 172 rest of season ISO in the majors. So this is just another guy that has no business being close to minimum salary.
I just wanted a victory lap saying Stokastic properly 4 times in a row without
so
stuttering, without mixing up a T and a K, because I've said Skotastic a couple of times during the ad read, but I'm getting it down, starting to get that feeling a little more natural to me, because there's still a part of me that wants to say Awesemo, but I did it. I nailed the read that time.
The issue that I run into is I know how the word Stokastic is actually spelled, so I read our name, then my brain changes it to Skotastic the right way, but then I want to say Scholastic instead of Skotastic, and it just messes me up every time.
Hey, Scholastic, the old school book fairs. Did everybody have those at their elementary school?
I did. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, me living in the Northeast and you living more in the Maryland, Baltimore area. So I guess they were everywhere. We've got a sample size of 2 places.
Yes, also.
Yeah. All right. So we had them everywhere. The Scholastic Book Fair. We're not selling books anytime. Well, no, who knows? We're a broad-ranging company now. Maybe we'll be selling books at some point. I don't know who will be writing them, because none of us could read or write, but that'll be maybe eventually something down the road. Where were we? Next game. Okay. Rangers and Phillies. That was the next game to hit on. Pitching matchup, Martin Perez, Kyle Gibson. These are 2 guys I very rarely have rostered this year in DFS, but they're also guys that I haven't been stacking against either. I guess the main question I have for you here is, how much do you buy into what we've seen out of Martin Perez this year? Because this is not the same Martin Perez who's sucked for the last few years.
Yeah, that's certainly true. The strikeout stuff still isn't great. Only a 20.8% strikeout percentage against righties, 15.3% against lefties. But he has done a very good job of limiting production, 3.63 xFIP, only walking 5.5% of hitters. So he's someone that in the past had been kind of difficult to target against anyway, because when he's on, he would get a lot of ground balls. But he's been even better this year. So it's still somebody that I'm not going out of my way to target. I do think you probably see some regression going forward, just because typically when you have a guy that's been in the major leagues for a long time, like Martin Perez, and then they suddenly start pitching better, more often than not, you're going to see them go back to being closer to what they've always been.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with you. There's no way Martin Perez is going to continue to pitch that well this year. At the same time, too, I'm not dying to stack the Phillies against him, because even a Martin Perez with some regression is a fairly high ground ball pitcher who, like, I don't expect him to go from this to a guy who has an ERA over 5 or anything like that. But is there enough regression you see coming to Martin Perez in the future that makes you want to stack the Phillies tonight?
So, I mean, I think the case for the Phillies, it doesn't even have to do with like what you think about Martin Perez in the future. It's more so Phillies just another team where their good games are so good. Like their good games are tournament winners. And Martin Perez certainly is not in the category of pitchers that I'm just refusing to take good hitters against. So it's, you can think Martin Perez does this the rest of the year. I don't care what pitcher you're talking about. They're still going to have a bad start here and there. And Martin Perez, still somebody with a 20% shot, south of a 20% strikeout percentage going up against a team that has this much power is going to be it's going to be an interesting tournament spot. The one thing though is that the Phillies are expensive, so when you get the combination of a really expensive offense and a not great matchup, it can be kind of difficult to get there, especially on a slate like this too, where there's not a ton of mid-range pitching that you're going to feel good about.
Yeah, and then once again, kind of similar thoughts for me. Kyle Gibson compared to Martin Perez. Gibson, 21% strikeout rate, 3.72 expected ERA. He's a pitcher that doesn't really get blown up all that much. Isn't a guy that I've targeted against all that often this year. Is also going up against the Texas Rangers offense that isn't all that great. Has certainly been a little bit disappointing this year. I don't want to play Kyle Gibson, but I'm not actively looking to stack the Rangers either. Do you see this matchup any differently?
No, that's how I see it too. It's a good enough Rangers offense. It's a good enough pitcher in Gibson. If I get to a little bit of Seager or Cole Calhoun or Mitch Garver, who's cheap, or Jonah Heim, like any of those guys are fine. But I'm not going out of my way to target Gibson. And then Gibson himself is just another one of those Roansy Contreras pivots where in any given lineup, if you had up with Kyle Gibson, that's fine. But I wouldn't expect to be actively targeting Kyle Gibson.
All right, next game. And for my money, the worst pitcher we have going today, Chichi Gonzalez. So we haven't seen him pitch all that much this year. How the hell does this guy keep getting big league gigs? Because he goes from team to team. He sucks everywhere he goes. A team drops him. He goes somewhere else. And I guess another team picks him up and thinks, we're going to be the guy who could turn around Chichi Gonzalez or he'll lead innings for us. But I mean, can't you just call up any AAA pitcher and just hope he's better than Chichi Gonzalez? Because Gonzalez has delivered nothing at the big league level for quite a while now, really ever though.
Yep.
So Gonzalez this year, we've only seen him pitch 7 innings. They were with the Twins. He had a 7.71 ERA in those outings previous years for Chichi Gonzalez last year. 6.46 ERA, 6.81 expected ERA. The year before, 6.86 ERA, 6.16 expected ERA. For his career, he's a 5.69 ERA. He's been in the big league since 2015. Is there any reason to think that Chichi Gonzalez has any redeeming traits as an MLB pitcher?
No, I'm with you. I don't get how he keeps getting these chances. Like typically when you get bad pitchers that get chances, normally they at least like throw hard or something. And so it's like, oh, the tools are there. We just need to refine him into being able to throw strikes or not live in the middle of the plate. Chichi Gonzalez doesn't have anything. Like he's never struck guys out in the major leagues. Even if you want to, discount his time in Colorado, he didn't strike guys out with Texas either. He just doesn't that I'm aware of doesn't do anything well. He throws 92.5 miles an hour. Like, who cares? You can find this guy anywhere in the minor leagues. I don't know why they keep running him out there, other than he was a first round pick. And I don't know, maybe teams think that he'll eventually figure something out, but he's awful and very, very clearly a good spot for the Cardinals.
Yeah. And also when it comes to the Cardinals, I kind of think their top stack odds should be slightly higher in this spot. I mean, I know we have them as one of the overall top stacks on the slate, but I just don't think Chichi Gonzalez, other than just being luck-based where guys hit line drives at fielders, I just don't think he's capable of getting major league hitters out. So the Cardinals are going to be one of my favorite offenses to target. And I typically don't target the Cardinals all that often against right-handed starting pitchers. But this is going to be an exception because I just don't think Chichi Gonzalez is going to be getting anybody out at a big league level. So I like the Cardinals a whole bunch. I think this is going to be my most rostered stack on the slate. How high of a priority will St. Louis be for you?
Yeah, I liked him a lot as well. Going back to the 2020 season, 281 expected ISO to righties for Gonzalez, 150 to lefties. Since last year, 306 expected ISO to righties, 156 to lefties. Paul Goldschmidt looks great here, I think. Nolan Gorman is cheap at 3,900. Arenado looks very good. You can certainly get to Edman and Donovan at the top of the order. And then even the bottom of the Cardinals order, one, they're cheap with guys like Dylan Carlson, Harrison Bader, but also there's some speed there too. So you get, at least some stolen base upside in addition to what they can do with the bats. So the Cardinals do, as a stack, look good here, and they really aren't pulling much ownership. You're getting 11% going to Edman and Donovan, 9% to Goldschmidt, 8% to $2,200 Bader. Pretty much the entire team is relatively low owned here.
Just because somebody said that Chichi Gonzalez was, here we go. Josh Gillum said Chichi was solid in AAA. Let's see. Let's pull up these AAA numbers. So, all right, he made 8 appearances in AAA this year with a 3.44 ERA, 3.77 FIP. That's certainly not bad. But the last time we saw him with extended innings at AAA was 2019. He made 16 appearances with a 6.1 ERA and a 5.74 FIP.
That's PCL, AAA. Though. That's PCL.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Let's see. Well, so we spent a lot of time
He's
there.
Only been in the PCL, I think, outside of Minnesota.
Texas AAA, that's also PCL, right?
Almost positive, yeah.
All right. Well, his numbers suck there either. Yeah, I still wouldn't expect him to find more success even in the PCL. Or I would still expect him to find a little more success in the PCL compared to the major leagues. But I like the Cardinals today. I think that should be the main takeaway. Chichi Gonzalez, I think, is the worst starting pitcher on this slate. I don't expect there to be any real pushback against that. Starting for the St. Louis Cardinals, Jack Flaherty is going to be on the mound. What are you expecting from Flaherty, who just made his big league, well, not his big league debut, but his season debut a few days ago after he spent the beginning of the year on the injured list? The way I read it is we're probably going to be seeing limited pitches from Flaherty. He's good enough to where I don't want to stack against him, but I can't consider him at the same time either. But do you read the situation with Flaherty any differently?
No, it's kind of like a dead zone to me. He was limited. They said before his last start, he'd be limited to about 60 pitches. He threw exactly 60 pitches. Today, they're saying around 75 pitches. It's just difficult to want to go to a pitcher, even though his salary is reduced from where it would be if he had a normal workload. It's just difficult to justify going to a pitcher when you don't have that top end on the range of outcomes, because every pitcher is always risky, at least to some extent. So you're always taking on downside risk, but if there's not real legitimate tournament winning upside risk, it's just hard to get to guys like that. So yeah, it's hard to make a case for Flaherty here. I mean, the Brewers do have a lot of strikeouts in their lineup. You certainly could get like a perfect world scenario where like he's efficient and gets strikeouts and manages to go like 5 innings and strike out 6 or something. But that's kind of my point, is like, if he does that, it's going to be like, it would be like, oh, cool, I have Jack Flaherty, but you're still not looking at it saying like, oh, I needed Jack Flaherty to win a tournament today. And then there's a much better chance that you're looking at every Jack Flaherty lineup and saying, shit, I wish I didn't have Jack Flaherty because he went like 4 innings and struck out 4 or something like that.
Yeah, and he's also, not that he's expensive per se on DraftKings at 7,700, but it's just hard to see there being a reasonable GPP winning upside from him when he pitched 3 innings his last start. Something else that's a little bit of a concern for me, I took note of his velocity his first time out. Same thing that I did with Lance Lynn the other day. And I know Lance Lynn wasn't necessarily terrible yesterday, but he pitched 5 innings, gave up 5 runs. The Blue Jays put up 7 runs against him. I don't have quite the same concerns about Flaherty because he's 26 as opposed to Lance Lynn being 35. But the fact that Flaherty missed the start of the year with an injury and had an average fastball velocity of 92.4 in just 3 innings, that's something to keep an eye on, because if he's going to continue to throw like 92 as opposed to 94, I would have real reservations about his upside going forward. So I'm not going to stack against him. I'm not going to roster him today, but I'm definitely going to be paying attention to his velocity. Today's show, sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, use our promo code Awesemo to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Also, we've got a bunch of different tools that can help you build the best player prop cards possible over on Prize Picks, using, of course, OddsShopper over at Stokastic.com. You can either go right to OddsShopper.com, or you can go to our site and click on OddsShopper on the top right corner, and you'll see all different kinds of projections that could be used not just for player prop betting, but also very useful over at Prize Picks. All right, next game on this slate to hit on, it is the Toronto Blue Jays against the Chicago White Sox, and 2 really high upside starting pitchers that have had some struggles as of late. Kevin Gausman with a 26.1% K rate, Dylan Cease 32.9% K rate. Let's start by talking about Gausman, because he's been giving up all kinds of hard contact lately. He was uber chalk in his last start against the Orioles. If you were playing on DraftKings, he was around 70-something% owned, if I remember correctly, in most tournaments. Over on FanDuel, he was around 40%. And he got absolutely lit up by your Baltimore Orioles, Adam. Are you concerned with Gausman going forward because he has had a string of bad starts, or is it just a thing where like, hey, these are isolated starts, they're not indicative of anything to come?
I mean, I'm concerned just in the sense where you're always going to be concerned when guys put together a stretch of bad starts. The strikeout numbers, haven't been there. Obviously, he got lit up by Baltimore. Minnesota, he only went 3 2/3. Uh, Gave up gave up 3 earned runs, gave up 3 earned runs in 5 innings against the White Sox. Even the start against the Tigers, though, where he went 6 innings, gave up 1 earned run, he only struck out 4 in a spot where you would expect to get more strikeouts. So all of that's concerning. The first thing I always look at with Gossman is whether or not he's throwing his splitter. He has still been throwing his splitter in previous starts, so that's a good sign. Sometimes, at least back when he was with the Orioles, he would forget that he had a good splitter and just start throwing his very, very easy to hit fastball. So that's a good sign. There's always there's probably a chance he's tipping pitches, and that could be it. But really, from a DFS standpoint, the thing for me is that you still have a long track record of Gossman having a high ceiling, having good strikeout upside. He's only pulling about 10% ownership right now. When you compare that to the other top guys, whether that's Manaea, Cortez, Cease, Strider, even if you have concerns, I think you can make a pretty strong tournament case for just rolling the dice on certainly one of the more talented pitchers on the slate, even if, recently he hasn't been very good.
It's kind of the same things we could say about Dylan Cease on the other side of the game, 32.9% K rate. He has had some walk issues as of late that have kind of hurt his ability to work deep into games, because you look at the game log here for Dylan Cease, and his last 3 starts, 5 innings, 4 2/3 innings, 4 2/3 innings. The reason being is because across those 3 starts, he's walked 11 hitters. It's just hard to work deep into games consistently. We're walking guys that regularly. The strikeouts are still there. But once again, upside a little bit capped, because when you're walking a lot of guys, you're not pitching as many innings, but you're also giving up more runs. So it is promising, at least, to see the strikeout upside is still there. But Dylan Cease, Kevin Gausman, are both these guys that you see viable, at least in some extent, for tournament purposes, even if they aren't the safest pitchers?
Yeah, Cease is pretty much the same case I just made for Gossman, except for, he's at least still been getting strikeouts in his recent starts, like you said. Second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 32.9%, and it's not really particularly close. Strider's way ahead of him, but then there's basically a 5-point drop from Cease to Cortez. The matchup here is very difficult. We know the Blue Jays are really good, but that's also accounted for in ownership when you have Dylan Cease getting half the ownership of Nestor Cortez and 1/3 the ownership of Sean Manaea, despite being priced in between them. You're in cash, I fully expect that I'm going to end up with some combination of Cortez, Manaea, Strider. But in tournaments, when you're thinking more about range of outcomes than medium projection, there's no real reason not to want to get to Dylan Cease and his ceiling at reduced ownership.
And then as for the offenses in this spot, there actually are kind of high implied run totals. Blue Jays 4.8 against Cease. That's kind of staggeringly high considering how tough the matchup is. And the White Sox at 4.4. We have seen, like I said, some struggles out of these pitchers lately. Overall, they are 2 of the better pitchers in the American League, but do some of the recent downswings or struggles encourage you to want to get to exposure to either the Blue Jays or the White Sox offenses?
Not too much. For both of these offenses, I think they fall into the category of having enough upside, having enough power that, if you get to them here and there in tournaments, they're fine. But even within that category, I think Atlanta's ahead of them. I think the Braves. I think the Yankees are ahead of them. So, and that's just within the category of low-owned offenses that I don't really like their spots. So kind of surprised that we have the Blue Jays right now with the 4th highest top stack percentage. But I think that you're never wrong getting there, but I'll have trouble prioritizing them against Cease.
Yeah. Same for me. So 13 game slate, if you're somebody who plays 150 lineups, I wouldn't write off the Toronto Blue Jays or the Chicago White Sox. We actually have the Blue Jays with the 4th highest top stack odds on the entire slate, which once again, pretty high going up against Dylan Cease. So they do look under-owned from that standpoint. Then the other side, the Chicago White Sox, we do not have them projected particularly well at all. One of the lowest top stack odds on the slate. The White Sox for the year have struggled against right-handed pitching, but they do have Tim Anderson back in the mix. That should help out a little bit. But that aside, these are not high priority offenses for me, but they are worth some consideration in 150 max lineups. But if you're just somebody who plays a handful of lineups, I wouldn't really be considering either of these offenses in that kind of situation. A few games left here to talk about, 4 to be exact. Next one, Houston Astros, New York Mets, and 2 low strikeout pitchers in this game. Jose Urquidy for Houston, Trevor Williams for the Mets. I just realized I accidentally wrote the Cubs in here because I'm used to Trevor Williams pitching for the Cubs. But that aside, any reason to consider these pitchers, because they are both a no for me?
Yeah, no real case to be made. Difficult matchups as well. You know, the Mets don't strike out a lot. Houston doesn't strike out a lot. Both teams are towards the top of the league in WRC plus. The Mets are third. Houston is eighth. Both teams, their active rosters with sub 20% strikeout percentages. You mentioned it, you know, neither pitcher themselves does a good job getting strikeouts. Trevor Williams is at 21.7% this year, which is actually kind of surprisingly high for him. Jose Urquidy is at 17%. So outside of 150 lineups where random shit happens sometimes, I don't really have a case for either guy.
Yeah, and there was that one outlier start. Let me pull up Urquidy's game log where he randomly struck out something like 10 hitters. I think I remember that being accurate. It was, yeah, here it was. So start against the Texas Rangers, Urquidy struck out 10 hitters. He has 3 starts the entire year where he's more than 4 strikeouts, and this is the only one where he struck out more than 6.
If I remember,
in general,
right, he was like random chalk that game too.
Yeah, he was very random chalk that game and just went off I do remember that being a really, I think he was like 6,100 and there just weren't cheap starting pitchers. So people just played him because there was nobody else to roster. But other than that, he's not been good from a fantasy perspective the entire season. No real reason to consider him. And then kind of similar thoughts when it comes to Trevor Williams. But we've got 2 pretty high caliber offenses in this game between Houston and the New York Mets. Are either of them going to be priorities for you against these pitchers?
I do like both stacks here. I mean, I don't think either pitcher is a total gas can, but both of these offenses just have so much upside and aren't pulling much ownership. Right now, we have the Mets with a 4% chance of being the top stack, 4% aggregate ownership, Houston 4% and 2% respectively. But just, you know, so much power in these lineups, particularly the Houston side from a power standpoint, but the Mets side, you know, also just from a having good hitters standpoint. So I do like both of these offenses. I don't think that they're getting quite as much ownership as they deserve. Individually, Alvarez and Tucker, I think, look very good from the Astros. They are expensive, but yeah, both of these stacks are pretty nice. Brandon Nimmo at 3,700 is a nice value option.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. Actually, there's actually been a lot of slates as of late where I've gotten to Nimmo, where he's been leading off for the Mets at cheap price points. And I think that the totals in this game also might be a little bit underselling the caliber of these offenses because 4.4 implied run total for the Mets, 4.8 for the Astros. I think there's reason to think that should be a little bit higher. So I'm actually going to look at some of the betting lines for this game afterwards and consider potentially making a bet either on the team totals or the game totals for this spot. But moving on, 3 games left to talk about. Los Angeles Angels at home against the Kansas City Royals. John Heasley is going to be on the mound for KC. He's not particularly good. The Angels were massive chalk yesterday, and they did not come through for the public. They were owned just by far the most popular team on the slate. I think I remember in our projections, we had the Angels being the most popular, but they still far exceeded their ownership projections. And I do wonder if that's going to sour people on them potentially a little bit today, because we have the Angels projected to be the highest owned team once again at 11.3% projected ownership. If they're going to be this popular, same thing as me that I did yesterday. I'll play some of them as one-offs, but I can't prioritize the Angels when they're this popular and so negatively leveraged. Number 1 most negatively leveraged team as of now. This is one of the only offenses where I'm really concerned about the ownership. But how are you viewing them in a good matchup against Heasley?
Yeah, same boat. I mean, if I have a low owned lineup, like, you know, if I have a contrarian stack or contrarian pitching or whatever, obviously I'm happy to get to Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, Taylor Ward. These guys all look great. Jared Walsh is underpriced at 3,400 at first base as well against Heasley, who so far this year is a lot of 290 ISO to expected ISO to lefties. But it's a 13 game slate, and there's just a ton of variance in baseball. And anytime you're going to get, you know, 15 to 20% ownership on like all of the hitters that you would want from a lineup, it's not going to be a bad idea to just not be there. You have to just kind of keep in mind, you know, you're not trying to win one individual slate. You're trying to win over the course of a season, and you're just going to you're going to give yourself a better chance at making good money in baseball tournaments by just sucking it up and not being on the clear cut top projected offenses in tournaments. So in cash, I fully expect to have a lot of Angels. Wouldn't be surprised at all if I have at least 4 of them. You know, Ohtani, Trout, Walsh, and Ward. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But in tournaments, probably just going to end up not really getting to the field because I'm going to be mixing them into low owned lineups more so than I'm going to be just jamming in Angel stacks.
Yeah, and once again, just keep updated on what the ownership projections are here. Top Stacks tool is free today. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out our deep dive and live before lock early in the day, because as of right now, this is a spot to pay attention to. And like I said before, we had massive ownership on the Angels yesterday. So I'm curious to see if the field is going to want to go back to them after they were so disappointing on a smaller slate last night. But starting for the Angels, Reed Detmers is on the mound. I don't stack against Detmers very often, but I never roster him either. I know, as somebody noted in the YouTube chat here, is that if Reed Detmers starts, I'm usually betting the under on his strikeout prop, which is true and has been the true for the last 6 weeks or so. But books have started to move his strikeout prop lines from 5 and 4.5 down to 3.5. So it's just really thin now in terms of the kind of value we had relative to the start of the year, where strikeout props were a little bit inflated. But the key takeaway here anyway with Detmers is with that 17.7% K rate, it's just hard to find that much fantasy upside in him. So no interest for me in either Detmers, nor do I have interest in the Royals offense. Do you see any differently in terms of this matchup?
I do think Detmers is a little cheap at 6,700, given it's a decent matchup against KC, but that would still just be, sort of a here and there tournament play for me. I'm interested in the Royals, though. Detmers has actually been surprisingly not very good at controlling the running game. He's allowed 8 stolen bases this year. There is, plenty of stolen base upside on Kansas City. But then also there's just, even though Kansas City as a whole isn't a very good offense, there's bats at weak positions that I like, and that always makes them kind of interesting to me. Whit Merrifield at second base, Bobby Witt at shortstop, Salvador Perez at catcher, specifically. So I'm always kind of interested in getting to the Royals, especially when they're not pulling much ownership, which is the case right now.
All right, now let's get to what is going to be one of the most important pitching matchups of the entire slate. Sean Manaea against Zach Gallen. Manaea is the most popular pitcher on both DraftKings and FanDuel. 44% owned on DK, on FanDuel 29% for Manaea. Clearly a pretty good spot for him against Arizona. Manaea individually has been solid this year. Their strikeout upside, because he's a 25.5% K rate. So I think everybody has at least some reason to consider Manaea. Cash games, he's a very strong consideration, probably even a must play in cash games. But for tournament purposes, how much exposure do you anticipate getting to him? Do you want to be above the field, or right around the field, or below the field? What do you do with him relative to all that ownership?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really care that much individually. Like, however it works out is going to be fine with me. Typically, I in situations like this, I'll end up not getting to as much as the field, but then other times, like yesterday, I ended up playing like 80 something percent of Garrett Cole. It really is going to come down to how much do I get to low owned offenses versus popular offenses. The more I'm getting to low owned offenses, the more I can get to Manaea. The more I'm getting to teams like the Angels or the Cardinals or the Twins or the Red Sox, then the less Manaea that I'm going to get to. So kind of just depends on how it shakes out that way. But I do understand why the ownership is coming into Manaea like it is. He's just underpriced here. He's a good strikeout pitcher. He struck out about 26.5% of righties this year, 25.5% of hitters overall. He's only 9K, so less expensive than Cease in a better matchup, less expensive than Zach Gallen on the other side of this game. So I understand why the ownership's there. We did mention, there are plenty of guys in the mid range that aren't pulling ownership that you can go to pivot away from Manaea if you need to in a given lineup. But Manaea certainly projects better than all of them.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the game, I think Zach Gallen's a pretty sneaky tournament play. A lot of people are going to be gravitating towards Manaea, and for good reason. But the Padres' offense hasn't been great against right-handed pitching this year, and the one hitter they've had that's been unbelievable this year is Manny Machado, and he's hurt now because of that ankle injury. So I look at Zach Gallen as being overlooked by the field. He's had a really, really strong season, and 22.6% strikeout rate. So it's not like he's striking out everybody or anything like that, but still, the numbers for him overall for the year are solid. He's been really good at preventing other teams from scoring. I think this is a much easier matchup than people realize with Machado being out for the Padres. Gallen's one of my favorite pay-up options to be contrarian today. Do you see reason to get to Gallen as well?
Yeah, I'm with you on the watered down San Diego lineup. One negative for Gallen is that he has only struck out 19.8% of lefties this year compared to 25% of righties. San Diego's projected lineup does have 6 left-handed hitters, including 4 in the top 5 and 5 in the top 6. So from a strikeout standpoint, maybe still runs into some issues, but certainly a watered down lineup, only 15% ownership. Definitely someone where if you do have a lineup that's a little bit more popular, going from Sean Manaea to Zach Gallen makes all the sense in the world, because even though Manaea projects better, they are very similar in range of outcomes here.
Yeah, so I think we see this the same way, and I'm curious to see if there's an ownership uptick for Gallen later in the day. Maybe once that lineup comes out and people really see like, oh, Machado, which we know Machado is going to be out. It was a pretty gruesome looking ankle injury the other day, but I don't know that people are attacking the Padres offense in the way that they necessarily should be, considering how watered down it's going to be. Last game on the slate to talk about, both the pitchers suck. James Kaprielian for Oakland and his 14.7% K rate. Very rare that Kaprielian is going to be the starter in a game with the highest K rate, but that is the case because Marco Gonzalez starting for Seattle on the other side with a 13.7% K rate. I see no reason to consider Kaprielian at all. In general, I don't like to roster Marco Gonzalez, but could this slate be an exception because he's going up against Oakland?
Yeah, I was going to say the reason for Gonzalez would just be he's 7,100. He's pitching in Oakland. He's facing Oakland. So there's always going to be some upside there just of the like 6 to 7 inning, 5 strikeout variety. But certainly not somebody that I'm excited about. He just kind of fits the bill. He's like Rich Hill for me. I think that's a very good comp on this slate where I would certainly rather take the upside of Roansy Contreras, but Roansy Contreras is also getting 5 times the ownership. So there's going to be some lineups where I just don't really want Contreras there. Yeah, so good matchup. Shitty strikeout pitcher, shitty DFS pitcher. The ownership is probably a little bit lower than it should be, but also he just isn't going to look as good as somebody like Contreras.
Yeah, and then as for the Oakland offense, they're actually picking up a little bit of ownership, so that kind of lessens the appeal for Oakland's offense for me. 3% ownership, I get they have good value odds, but I don't really find it to be necessary on this slate. We talk about the Seattle offense then. They do have a fairly high 4.7 implied run total. They also look like one of the more positively leveraged offenses on the entire slate. So it's obviously going to be not the best situation in the world in terms of ballparks because Oakland is such a pitcher-friendly park. But Kaprielian's been so miserable this year, and Seattle's offense is kind of underrated. I think this is a decent spot to get to Seattle. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, and I will say too, I do kind of like that 1 through 5 from Oakland, assuming that it's Pinder, Laureano, Bethancourt, Murphy, Davidson. They do have some right-handed power there that can take advantage of Gonzalez, but I'm with you and certainly preferring the Seattle side. Kaprielian had some success in the majors last year, and it was kind of like, where did this guy come from and why is he having success? And then this year he has very quickly regressed to being really, really bad. 15% strikeout percentage, 10% walk percentage, 2.2 home runs per 9, 5.5 xFIP, going up against a Mariners team that has a 107 WRC plus, 141 ISO is not great, but certainly not a bad spot for them. They have the 6th highest top stack percentage, only getting 3% ownership. They're another team in there with Atlanta. They're in the mix with Atlanta, teams like Houston, the Mets that I really like getting to because I just think that they're better than the pitcher that they're facing and they're only getting 3 to 4% ownership.
All right, that is going to do it for us. That is going to do it for us today. 13 games, we made it through all of them in good time, but make sure to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the MLB Live Before Lock and deeper dive later in the day because I'm sure stuff will change as the day goes on. No weather concerns, but other stuff like ownership could change and whatnot. Maybe some starting pitching changes, some more betting lines confirmed. That could have some impact on stuff like ownership. But guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a good day. See y'all later.